Okay, so let us begin. It is 18th of Kislev, 11th of Kislev, November 15th. Rav Saul Lieberman, number 12. Again, thank you all for joining us, those who are listening. For those who are listening, not live or who weren't on a minute ago, just if you're interested in our trips, go to the Torah in Motion website. We have the Portugal trip next summer, the Spain trip, the Italy trip, the Central Europe trip, and it's not too late to sign up for Morocco. We're going to Morocco early January, so please join us. Let me pick up on a few things. Bill mentioned last class that Rav Kanievsky and Lieberman were together in Slobodka, and I wasn't sure. I said, is that true? We need to check the dates, and indeed it is true. Although Rav Yaakov is older than him. He's 8 years older. He's born in 1891, 7 years older. Nevertheless, they were there at the same time. I forgot to mention, with regard to Ginsburg, we spoke last class. I was telling you about how the Telzers were giving him such kavod. There's a reason for that. I should have mentioned. I don't know why I forgot. And the reason is as follows. I think this is the real reason. Ginsburg did an enormous amount for Telz. Dovi Safir sent me from from the Cyrus Adler archives the following. He sent me about 5 letters. This is just one of them. Cyrus Adler was the head of, in the joint, he was in charge of distributing money to yeshivas in Europe. And so here's just one of many letters where Ginsburg writes to Adler, my sense of loyalty to my old alma mater, the yeshiva of Telsh, is stronger than my reluctance to impose on you additional burdens. And it's a letter asking him to distribute money to the Telz yeshiva. So there was a lot of Hakara Satov also from the Rosh Yeshiva for Ginsburg for helping the yeshiva. Last class I mentioned how the Stipler said that you shouldn't use Lieberman's Yerushalmi Kivshuto, even though that was written before he went to the seminary. Now, Harry from Manchester writes to me that I have seen Yerushalmi Kivshuto on Rav Hayyim Kanievsky's bookshelves. I once asked him if he read Lieberman's Sifrei Hakira, scholarship, and he said he hadn't. So what I said to Harry is the Stipler never said it was forbidden. What he said is you shouldn't. His exact language is quoted in Orchos Rabbeinu, volume 5, page 206, is Shelo Kedai L'Ayin. It's not appropriate, it's not proper. But that leaves, but for people, that's for the average person. But for special people like Reb Chaim, I guess it's okay. Now, since I mentioned Reb Hayyim Kanievsky, let me show you something here. I think those who haven't seen it will, I think, find this of interest. In one of my blog posts, I published a letter from Saul Lieberman was asked by, there was something called the Rothschild Trust in Switzerland, which gave awards out to great Torah scholars. And he was asked, together with Rabbi Saul Lieberman, by the way, he was asked to recommend people to the great Torah scholars, who he would recommend. And here is the letter that that he says to this Mr. Rao. I have your letter dated December 9th, and I have given a great deal of thought to your question. I would first recommend Rabbi Hayyim Kanievsky of Bnei Brak for the Rothschild Prize. He published 6 books. One of them, Sources on Maimonides, it's a book that has the various, every halacha, all the sources on the Rambam for that halacha. Different, they're not always the real sources, like various midrashim, even the Zohar, but for every single halacha, even things that aren't halacha, hashkafa, he gives you sources. He says one of them, Sources on Maimonides, which are published separately, has been now included in editions of Maimonides. His notes on the minor tractates have no parallel. Rav Hayyim Kanievsky, and this letter is dated 1970, it's a long time ago, wrote notes on the minor tractates, the so-called extra tractates, Maseches Sofrim, things like that. And Lieberman says they have no parallel. He is known only among a small circle of scholars, since his books were published anonymously. Of course, today he's known by everyone. He's in the Haredi world. They've even in the Yeshivish world, they've even turned him into Lubavitcher Rebbe. But then he was known only by a small circle. And he says, I consider him superior to his father, the Horner Stipler, the Stipler. So this is unbelievable that Lieberman, who knew both of them, is saying that the son is greater than the father. Then he recommends two other people, Rav Shapiro of Jerusalem, who wrote a commentary on the Smock, and he says Rav Joseph Soloveitchik, that's not the Rav, that's of Jerusalem, that's the son of the Brisker Rav. Incidentally, all these people are related to Lieberman. So Hayyim Kanievsky is related through the Chazon Ish, and this Rav Shapiro is related, and also the Brisker Rav's family is related to him. Then he says, the people I recommended are middle-aged scholars who, in my opinion, need encouragement much more than the older scholars, many of whom they surpassed. If you remember last week, we quoted Lieberman saying he doesn't really like prizes for Torah study. We need to give prizes out, but if you give prizes, give it to the younger scholars as an encouragement, not to the older ones. So this is of interest for another reason as well. Hold on a second here. Because after I published this, let me show you again here. There's three Haredi websites, news sites, and the most popular I think is the Yeshiva World, and then comes Vasas Nayas, which are fairly liberal Haredi, and then there's something called Matzav, which is more right wing. Lo and behold, this is April 28th, 2020. Without asking me, this appears on the website. Fascinating 1970 letter from Saul Lieberman regarding Rothschild Prize release via Marc Shapiro. At least they gave me credit. But anyone reading this, they show the letter and they quote just a passage of what I wrote, as well as the picture I showed you earlier. You would think that I submitted it and I wrote on Matzav, which of course I didn't. Now, the best thing about these Haredi sites are the comments. You see all the crazies and together with normal people, but it's a real study in sociology, and usually they're anonymous with pseudonyms. Let me show you some of the comments now, and everything we've been discussing, you see in the actual comments that we've been discussing. So listen to this, just the comments. Comment number 1. I think you should take it down, not Bakovodik, to include something as ridiculous as I consider him superior to his father. So someone replies, why not? It could be that he was. Then Ben Torah says, Mr. Saul Lieberman was a conservative, quote, rabbi who espoused heretical ideas contrary to Torah Judaism. An Israel reader replies, Rav Saul Lieberman was an Orthodox scholar who davened 3 times a day and happened to take a job in a conservative institution. Can you enumerate the heretical ideals contrary to Torah Judaism he religiously espoused? Then Moshe says, not Moshe, Moshe, Saul Lieberman was a first cousin to Lahavdil, the Chazon Ish. And Dr. Yid says it's a real testament to Rav Kanievsky that despite the familial connection, the Grosh was a first cousin once removed who respected the Grosh despite his relative youth. He means respected the Kanievsky. Then Joey says to Moshe, to say lahavdil, that is to say lahavdil between the Chazon Ish and Rav Saul Lieberman is unheard of. Saul Lieberman was a frum Jew in private life and a Gavaldik Gaon. He worked for the seminary for Parnassa. You need to beg mechila. Then Eli says, Marc Shapiro is a renowned heretic who delights in ridiculing Chazal and Rabbanim. He has no place on a frum website. So there you go. And then Dr. Isaac Balbon, be careful with your words. Purveyors of truth are not heretics. And then it goes on with other comments. So the very argument we've been discussing, what do you make of Lieberman? Is he, how do the Orthodox relate to him? You see there, as well as with the stupidity. Last class, I spoke about someone, Alei Zayas, called attention to, we were speaking about praising yourself. And Alei Zayas said, well, what about the pasuk? This pasuk he called attention to. Proverbs, chapter 27, verse 2. It says, Yihalel chazar v'lo ficha. Let another man praise you and not your own mouth. There's a whole tradition. You might think it's a joke, but it actually appears in the Zohar. And you can read all about it in Rav Shmuel Ashkenazi's book, Alpha Beta Tanyeta de Shmuel Zeira, volume 1, pages 371 on. There's a whole tradition of reading this verse as, Yalel Chazar, let another man praise you, v'lo. But if there isn't anyone else, ficha, you should praise yourself. And he cites all the sources here, many, many sources, including, this is an interesting one, that the Munkatcher mentions, or Rabbi Shapiro, someone wanted to know how the Baal Shem Tov can call himself the Baal Shem Tov. After all, isn't that a praise? You're saying to yourself that you're the Baal Shem Tov. And the Munkatcher explains that no, because that's what he was called. People called him that, so therefore he can call himself that. So you can read all about it there. And finally, my last point I want to make. A couple of people asked me about the Ger Hasidim. I mentioned last class about their very extreme stuff. Well, first of all, the main thing which most people know is this. You can read Benny Brown's article, The Sexual Abstinence of Married Men in Gur, Sodom, and Toldos Aharon. There is extreme asceticism, especially in Gur, as Brown says right here, Gur's version of the most restrictive. This asceticism is such that after having children, it's basically celibacy. And even when it's not celibacy, it's everything that Orthodox Jews say we're not about, and Hasidic Jews say we're not. The Steipler has a letter against the Ger Hasidim and their practices, to which the Ger replies that the wives agree to all of this, like they can actually know what they're agreeing to when they get married at 17 or 18, but you'd be shocked. So if you see what goes on, totally in opposition to what we regard as healthy lifestyle. But quite apart from that, and I've spoken in the past about that, so I don't need to repeat it, let me just read you some of the takanot about unmarried men. I can't read all of them because there's about 100 of them here, and these have been increasing over the years. But just I'll read you some of them. For Bachrim and Yeshivas, 2 boys cannot sit on the bed together. 2 boys can't be alone in a room together. You cannot bathe yourself in the house, only in a mikvah. You can't be up after 10 p.m. You can't sleep in a bed in the afternoon. When you eat, you have to wear your hat. You can't speak to your aunts. Non-married Bachrim cannot sing Eshes Chayil. Non-married Bachrim, they cannot look in a mirror. They can't sit during davening, even in Tachnun. I don't know what that's about. They can't say Isha Bachura Vayalda. They can't even say the words. They can't say my mother, my sister, my aunt, and it goes on and on and on. I'm holding here a list of them. 104 of these extreme ideas. So hopefully Rav Shaul Alter will come in, and you can't ride on a bicycle. It goes on and on and on. You can't go to a hotel. You can't go to the sea. You can't be at a Shalom Zocher. I don't know what to say, but this is when people talk about the extremism of Ger, that's exactly what we're referring to, and what's behind some of the controversy now of the Shaul Alter. One more thing, I forgot. I did want to show you one more thing. There was a rabbi in London. Here he is. It's Tzvi Hirschferber. Why do I mention him? He wrote a number of svarim because we spoke about. He mentions. He quotes it in the name of an unnamed early authority, but it doesn't say who it is. So I'll attribute it to him. We spoke about the idea of associating with the evil ones, where they said either by being with Shaul Lieberman, he's the evil one, you're associating with him, or his problem is that he's associated with the evil ones. I'm going to give you a little Dvar Torah, which I just saw from Tzvi Hirschferber. He has another Svarim. He says as follows, and you can remember this probably. It's a strange pasuk, strange language. Kayin says in Parshas Bereshis, Perek Daled, he says to his brother Hevel, when it's interesting. It says Vayomer Kayin el Hevel achiv. What does he say to his brother? He doesn't mention it. If you look in the Septuagint, they add there that, and you'll find this in many English translations. They don't tell you it's not in the Masoretic text. He says, "Let us go out to the field." But it's not in the Masoretic text. It's missing for whatever reason. The Mefarshim and Midrashim can explain what exactly he said. And actually, if you look at Midrashim, they explain it's a whole big dialogue he has. But leave that aside. They were they were in the field. Vayakam Kayin el Hevel achiv v'hargehu. Kayin rose up on Hevel achiv and slew him. It's a strange language. It shouldn't say Vayakam Kayin el Hevel. It should say Vayakam Kayin al Hevel achiv. So Tzvi Hirschferber says, quoting one of the early authorities, is that you're not allowed to be connected and have a good relationship, to be connected to Rishayim. The problem with, I hope this is not an example of blaming the victim. The problem with Hevel, he says, was that Hevel, he came to Hevel as a friend, and apparently Hevel was accepting to that. That's the word El, to tell you that Cain comes to Hevel as a friend, and Hevel accepts him, and that's the problem. It should be Vayakam Cain Al, but it shows you that the problem here was that Hevel was not careful, and he allowed someone that he should have kept away from to be next to him, El, and that led to his death. So, and that is, Schroeder brings that as an example of the importance of keeping away from the wicked, like keeping away from Cain. Okay, everyone, let us continue. Up to now, we've seen enough to know that there's reason, if you want to oppose Lieberman, to regard him as michutz l'machana, out of the camp, to not cite him. And many, as I said, many Orthodox scholars, Talmidei Chachamim, will not cite Lieberman because they're afraid of the reaction. But others, it's simpler that they'll cite him, but they won't cite him by name because of the reaction. But for others, it's simpler. They in the Haredi world, there is this notion that if someone is not at the proper level of piety, but he says something positive, that's something good that you can use, it's not that you don't cite it. Some say you don't cite it at all. Others say, no, the issue is you can't just mention him by name because that gives kavod. But there's nothing wrong with citing the idea. So therefore, they will cite Lieberman's ideas. Bill mentioned that he's seen this a lot. Many people have seen this, but they won't mention him by name. And Tosfos, actually, there's rabbinic precedent for this, because Tosfos records that while Rav Meir would cite his teacher, Elisha ben Avuya, Acher, he's called Acher, he would not reveal the source because his teacher had left the fold. If you want to read about Acher, you can read all about Milton Steinberg's wonderful book, get a sense of perhaps who Elisha ben Avuya was and what was influencing him. But you see already that there is such a source. We see in the Gemara that you cite the idea, but you don't cite the name, the individual name. This is against another tradition, that accept the truth from whoever said it. But this is a tradition as well. Thus, no matter how negatively you view Lieberman, you can use this source to say you can benefit from his writings without acknowledgement, even though normally we say that if you cite something, you have to cite it by name and you bring redemption to the world, the Gemara says if you do that. Not so for people who have left the fold. Similarly, Sefer Hasidim mentions that a Torah insight, a chidush, should not be cited in the name of one who causes others to sin. And for the people we've seen already, many of them, they would regard Lieberman as one who causes others to sin because he's cast his lot with the conservative, even if only as a teacher at their seminary. On the other hand, there are plenty of great Torah scholars who we've seen have no compunctions referring to Lieberman, even when he's at the seminary, with all the titles that we know go to Gedolei Yisrael. I just want to give some examples, all from after 1949, when he's the rector of the dean of the rabbinical school. And from this date, there's no question of his association with the conservatives. Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, Hagon HaMufla Per Hador. Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg calls him the Gon Mufla, the glory of the generation. Rabbi Soloveitchik, Hagon Hagodol, Baki B'chol Chedrei Torah. The great Gaon, who's Bucky, knowledgeable in all areas of Torah, Rabbi Henkin, to Lieberman. HaGaon Ish HaEshkolot, the Gaon, the encyclopedic mind, not at the level of the three we just saw, but Rabbi Chavel. I found Rabbi Chavel from the RCA and the editor of the Ramban. Harav HaGodol, Abahua, B'chiburov HaNifa'im. Rav Gedalia Felder, I'll mention him because we have people from Toronto. Harav Hagon Hamaforsam B'chiburav Hayakarim. Rabbi Felder refers to Rav Chaim Zimmerman. Rav Chaim Zimmerman, you should see how he goes after Ginsburg. Rav Chaim Zimmerman took no prisoners, and he didn't suffer fools kindly, and he said his mind again and again. This is what he writes to Lieberman. L'chad b'tkifei dorenu Hagon Hamufla Habaki B'chol Michmane HaTorah VaChachma. Believe me, Rabbi Zimmerman is not giving out compliments unneeded. He's not that sort of person. Harav We've spoken in the past a bit about Rav Chaim Zimmerman is another one of those Gaonim, massive Gaonim who never really got his due for whatever reason. I've mentioned a few of them, and we've mentioned Rav Savitsky, Rav Yehuda Gershuni, Rav Chaim Zimmerman. He was at Skokie, of course, or it was Chicago then. I don't think I moved to Skokie till he had problems with Eliezer Berkovitz. Well, I've told the story. I don't need to tell the story again. Because of Lieberman's wide-ranging knowledge and the respect he had, it's not surprising that Gedolei Yisrael turned to him to ask his assistance in halachic matters. There's no question that the people I just mentioned never ceased to regard Lieberman as being on their side, if we can use that term, when it comes to orthodoxy. Thus, just to give another example, in 1957, Rav Herzog writes the conservatives, when they didn't accept, eventually they decided they don't want to accept Lieberman's ketubah. Instead, they're going to go the route of Kiddushin al Tanai, conditional marriage. And I showed you the version they use today. Rabbi Herzog writes to Lieberman and how upset he is by this. And I include the letter in the back of Lieberman and Orthodox. He says, I'm shocked that chugim mesuyamim, that certain groups in the conservative movement want to institute Kiddushin al Tanai. And he says that, of course, how can such a thing happen? I'm asking, I turn to you, don't allow this to happen. And we spoke about conditional marriages. So he's writing to Lieberman as an ally to stop the conservative movement from going in this way. Similarly, earlier, Rabbi Herzog wrote to Lieberman about other matters. Rabbi Unterman wrote to him. We can give again and again examples that they turn to Lieberman for assistance. Now, Hillel Goldberg tells the following interesting story. Who is Hillel Goldberg? Hillel Goldberg, PhD from Brandeis, written a number of interesting things. This is one of his, I think, his most famous book, Between Berlin and Slobodka. Chapters on Rabbi Saul Salanter, Professor Wolfson, Rabbi Hutner, Rabbi Soloveitchik, Professor Heschel, and Rabbi Joseph Z. Lipowitz. He's sort of like the only unknown character. He's written a good deal more. He also, his last book has moved totally away from this. It's just traditional Torah Chidushim on mikvos, a Hebrew volume. But he's very insightful. He's the editor of the Intermountain Jewish News in Denver. He told the following story. He was in YU in the 60s, and there was a big fire at the seminary library. Fortunately, the precious manuscripts were not affected. Many other works were destroyed. And I'm sure there's people listening to us now who are, or will listen on YouTube later or on the Torah Motion website, who were there at that time. He tells the story that he and a friend, that is Goldberg and a friend, organized hundreds of YU students to go down to the seminary and help save the books. The books were all wet because the firemen had been in and everything's wet. They had to take everything out. They had to lay it out and help dry it out, and they needed lots of help. The problem was there were a number of YU students, that you can imagine the type, who were saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be helping the seminary in this way. For the fact that these are Svarim of Kedoshei and Gedolei Yisrael, there are people who thought not. So Goldberg figured we have to at least get a psak that we should go, because these people are saying we shouldn't go help the seminary. So they Goldberg and his friend tried to reach the Rav, but they couldn't reach the Rav. This is before cell phones. The Rav could have been on a plane, who knows where he was. So therefore they turned to Belkin. They want Belkin to issue a ruling that they should go, so that these students saying we shouldn't do it, they can turn to them and say, you know, Dr. Belkin has issued a ruling. What does Dr. Belkin say? Belkin says, ask Lieberman if there's a chiyuv for you to go. I guess Belkin feels that maybe Lieberman would say, we have enough people, we don't need you here, whatever it is. But Belkin says, the psak, ask Lieberman. So they asked Lieberman, and Lieberman said, yes, we need you. It's you have to come, help us. And when Belkin, when they told Belkin, Lieberman said, Belkin affirmed it, and therefore announcements went up, including that Belkin agrees that you have to go help the books. Goldberg writes as follows. They hung this up all around the dorms. This is what Goldberg writes. This led to considerable consternation among the yeshiva administration and to denials that Dr. Belkin had said that which in fact he had told us. In the middle of the night, officials at the YU Public Relations Department were aroused from slumber by dorm officials, lest they feared the New York Times be informed that Dr. Belkin had accepted a psak from Professor Lieberman of JTS. Further, as the night went on, it became clear that the status of me and my friend at Yeshiva was in jeopardy, for in the eyes of the administration, we had besmirched YU. So you see the interdenominational politics, and even something as parv, as I don't see where you can find any negativity, as going help with the Sfarim written by rabbis that needed to be saved, that this would be seen as somewhat interdenominational cooperation, and there were consequences for Belkin in agreeing with Lieberman, and they had to backtrack of it. Now, the examples we've cited, and many more could be brought, unambiguously, again, I'll just say, illustrate the point that we've said again and again, that many in the Orthodox world continue to regard Lieberman as one of their own. It's no surprise, therefore, I found in the archives that when Chief Rabbi Unterman came to America in the late 60s, that there was a dinner in his honor, a small group, and Rabbi Soloveitchik invited Lieberman to be part of this group, having dinner with Rav Unterman. Now, this relationship between Rav Soloveitchik, the Rav, and Lieberman was not simply personal and familial. And this relationship continued to the son of the Rav Hayyim Soloveitchik in one of the volumes of his new essays, which the fourth volume just came out, which is a smaller book. It's devoted just to rupture and reconstruction and his that classic essay, Rupture and Reconstruction. For those who don't know it, you can now get it in the book form with, I think it'll have probably further reflections. Maybe you'll have criticisms, which he responds to. I don't have it. They're supposed to send to me. It's published by my favorite press, Lippman Library. That's the essay where Hayyim Soloveitchik tries to understand and explain how is it that in post-World War II America and Israel, there's no longer the home, the family, the community no longer has authority like it used to have. That's the rupture. That is practice. A lot of people talk about chumras. There's a lot of chumras out there. Chumras that have come about we never heard of. And it's true, there are these things. But the interesting thing is, normally you think of a chumra, you look at the sources, and let's say the majority opinion says this, and then there's the minority opinion, it's a chumra. We say that's a chumra. With a lot of these so-called chumras that have come about, actually, these are like black letter law. You look in the sources, and these are like standard things. They're not out of the way ideas. However, for hundreds of years, for whatever the reason is, no one followed these things. They followed a different approach, despite the fact that Shulchan Aruch might have mentioned it, or this is the more standard reading of the text. But this was not the practice. And no one would question. If you're living in Vilna for 300 years, this is the way you do it. No one's going to come about and say we have to change it. And that was how European Jewry operated. However, after the war, all of a sudden now you start having things, people are doing things differently than they used to. And if you say to them, wait, so we never did this, and say, what? No, this is, here it is. It's explicitly, it's in the Mishnah Berurah. It's in the Shulchan Aruch. So you have the rupture where you no longer have confidence in the tradition, and then you have the reconstruction, and it's reconstructed through a literary way, that is through texts, as opposed through the oral tradition, what Soloveitchik calls the mimetic tradition. And that's the meaning of this expression, rupture and reconstruction, very good term. In one of his essays, he says that the essays, in one of the volumes, he says the essays in this book were written for three people. My father, Yaakov Katz, who was his great teacher, his Dr. Vater, as they say in German, and Shaul Lieberman. So just think, Hayyim Soloveitchik, his idea is that each one of these essays have to measure up and be regarded as acceptable or contrary to scholarship by three people: my father, Yaakov Katz, and Shaul Lieberman. Everyone else is at a lower level. And if they disagree, then it's okay. But if those three, that's who he's trying to write for. Pretty incredible. I even was told that Rav Lichtenstein once brought his Smicha students down to meet Lieberman at the seminary. I'd love to confirm if that's true. I don't know. But the relationship of the Rav and Lieberman was not merely, as I said, personal and familial. In the mid-1950s, in an effort to create a baseline standard for American Jewry, both the Rav and Lieberman met secretly, while the leadership of the Rabbinical Council of America and the Rabbinical Assembly did likewise, and Rabbi Kelman's two uncles, Wolf Kelman and Abraham Kelman were big leaders, maybe because they're brothers, they could start it going. They were leaders in this effort on different sides. Wolf Kelman on the conservative side and Abraham Kelman for the RCA. What resulted was a plan to create a national beit din recognized by both groups, that is the Rabbinical Assembly, the conservatives, and the Orthodox, the RCA, as having exclusive authority in matters of Jewish family law. It would create a beit din that would determine all gittin would go through that, or they would have the right to approve other people to do gittin, and all questions of yichus, everything. It would be like what they have in Israel, the Supreme Rabbinic Court. It would be a Supreme Rabbinic Court to solve all final matters that the whole Orthodox and the conservative community would be bound by it. Now, the members of this beit din would be chosen by Lieberman and the Rav. And these dayanim, the three dayanim, would choose their successors. It was also agreed that the Rav and Lieberman would revise the Lieberman's ketubah so that it would meet with the Rav's approval, and this then would become standard for all of us in the Orthodox world as well, or I should say the modern Orthodox RCA world. Now, it's important to stress, because so much false information has been circulated regarding this proposed beit din. This was never supposed to be a joint beit din. In fact, Spiro and Shochet also used the term joint beit din. It's not true. Rabbi Rekefet has given talks about the joint beit din. Joint beit din implies that you're going to have Orthodox rabbis and conservative rabbis on it, and like Rekefet says, he could put Boaz Cohen because the Rav accepted his gittin. It's true, the Rav did accept Boaz Cohen's gittin, but it was not supposed to be a joint beit din. The joint beit din is something else. That's the Rabbinical Assembly and the faculty at the seminary. They were supposed to have to solve the issues of family issues. They were going to have a joint beit din. This was to be an Orthodox beit din, and only an Orthodox beit din. The only people on this beit din were to be Gedolei Yisrael. The model was to have been the chief rabbinate of Israel, whose authority is recognized even by the non-Orthodox. And this information, which we have in print, I'll give it to you. It was also, David Hollander at the time was one of the people very much involved with this. And I spoke to him about this. And he was, although he's a radical and an extremist in many ways, he was a supporter of this beit din. And Rav Aaron Kotler also, he told me, agreed in principle, even though he wasn't enthusiastic. Now, why would the conservatives go along with this? What do they have to gain? It's that you're basically saying that our rabbis are not good enough. And what do they get in return for this? You're ceding a family law to the Orthodox. Well, there's another precedent for this as well, and that's in Germany. In Germany, in the Gemeinde, in the communities, not the separatist community, you had Orthodox and non-Orthodox. So every Reform rabbi, conservative rabbis there, they can do marriages, but all the gittin, Reform, okay, they don't believe in gittin, but if they want to have a gittin, or if you're not Reform, let's say you're a historical school and you have a get, the city had a beit din run by the community, the Gemeinde. So, for example, Berlin, you had Reform, you had what we call today conservative, you had Orthodox, but you also had a beit din. And the beit din was traditional Orthodox rabbis. You had that in all the communities that had the Gemeinde. And anyone who wanted to get divorced would go to them, just like today in Israel. Anyone who wants to get divorced goes to the Rabbanut. Or you had in the conservative movement before the Louis Epstein revolution, let's say 1930, you want to get divorced, you go to the local rabbi. He's a traditional rabbi. What the Orthodox were selling to the conservatives was Klal Yisrael. The attitude was, yes, you're giving up something, but you're also getting something. That is, we can now be one people. There's no issues of lineage, yichus. We can all marry one another. So yes, you're giving something up, but in the name of Klal Yisrael, you should do it. And it's a hard sell, I think, because basically it's one thing if they did this in the 1930s, but to do this in the 50s, when you already have a conservative beit din doing gittin, you're asking them to stop doing what they're doing. It appears to be a no-go no good from the get-go. But that's what they were selling. It's similar to what they tried to sell when they wanted to create this beit din for conversion, that all the groups, the conservative and Reform, would also recognize, with the idea being that you let us, the Orthodox, do the conversion in the name of communal unity. It was never really answered how if the people aren't going to be at all observant, just because the Orthodox rabbis are doing a conversion, how that would work. But Norman Lamb supported this based in, and he wrote articles explaining that all of us have to sacrifice for Kol Yisrael. The Orthodox can sacrifice in other ways, but these groups can sacrifice in the name of Jewish unity. Now, it's not just Rabbi David Hollander. I found a letter from by Wolf Kelman, and he says as follows. 3 prominent Orthodox rabbinic luminaries were approached and did not reject the possibility of serving such a beis din. He also writes, however, that he wrote a memoir as to why it never worked. He said that he came to the conclusion that the major factor was the unwillingness of the Orthodox to disavow their right-wing resistance to any kind of cooperation with the conservative. That's one thing. He also says, though, the unwilling of the conservative leadership to disavow their own liberal colleagues, that is, members of the RA who didn't want to go along with this, who might have been unwilling to accept the projected jurisdiction of a beis din which consisted entirely of European-trained Talmudic prodigies. So here you see Wolf Kelman saying the problem was, well, first of all, the Orthodox, we'll see some of the Orthodox didn't accept this because they said, well, we don't want to have any cooperation with the conservative, but the conservatives didn't accept it because why should they put themselves under, as he says, European-trained Talmudic prodigies? We have I have a letter from Rabbi Aaron Blumenthal as well. So there was never any thought of having a joint beis din. And incidentally, I mentioned that Boaz Cohen, his Gittin were accepted. It's not just the Rav who's a liberal in this. I found in Masoras Moshe, volume 4, page 385, he says that Ramosha would sometimes accept Gittin of a conservative rabbi if the rabbi was a Shomer Shabbos, was religious. Let's say the case he's referring to here is he had smicha from Rabbi Tzolchanan. And he was Adam Dati, but he's working a conservative show. He said, you try to get another get, but if you can't, then that can be counted. So, I mean, and I told you already that with Ramosha, with reform, of course, it's possible. With the conservative, you have to look in each case. I know that even today, the RCA beis din, because I was called, believe it or not, from one of the Dayanim on the RCA beis din, he wanted to know what I knew about a certain conservative rabbi. Why? Because they had a situation of a get written by him. And I asked, well, why are you asking? I didn't have any information on him, but I gave him some names that they could contact, because what I was told was, because if they find out that he's a traditionalist, that an old-fashioned one, not like one today, that they'll be able to accept the get. They have to do some research. Now, Rav Soloveitchik, we know that Rav Soloveitchik is a strong opponent of conservative Judaism. He gave every indication of supporting the national beis din. However, the RCA had something then called the Halacha Commission. I don't know, do they have a Halacha Commission today? They had something called the Halacha Commission of rabbis, and these were all rabbis below the Rav, young rabbis. Even Rabbi Parnas was once a young rabbi, Julius Yehuda Parnas, as a young man, was on the Halacha Commission. But they had a Halacha Commission, and the Rav was not on it. He was not a voting member. They took a vote, and they rejected by 11-6, even though the Rav supported it. So on the one hand, as we'll see, the conservatives rejected it, but the RCA rejected it also. Now, I think that if the Rav went to them and said it's important, I presume they would change their mind. But working in the background, and what brought about the negative vote by people who've written about this, like Louis Bernstein and others explain, was that the leading Rosh Yeshiva, including Rav Moshe Feinstein, had only recently issued a ban against participation of rabbinic organizations or lay affiliates having anything to do with the non-Orthodox. When we finish with our Lieberman classes, we'll deal with Rav Zalman Ber Bamberger. We'll deal with this whole issue of separatism, and I'll do a tangent to talk about the whole controversy in America and the famous 1957 rabbinic proclamation banning interdenominational cooperation. Now, it seems, at least according to Louis Bernstein, that members of the Halacha Commission thought that if you create this beis din so soon after the ban was created, it would look as if we, and in particular the Rav, was 56, not 57, 56 was the rabbinic. Thank you, Baruch, was the rabbinic was the decree that was published in Apardes, and now we're dealing with a year later. They thought that this would show that the Rav and the RCA are snubbing the Rosh Yeshiva, so therefore they voted against it. But also very important, and this was of influential in the RCA's mind as well, the Rabbinical Assembly was not prepared to commit to disciplining members who flouted the Beis Din's authority. In other words, here we're going to go ahead and we're going to agree to this joint Beis Din, and the RA Rabbinical Assembly agrees as well. But then you have Rabbinical Assembly rabbis who continue to do the conditional marriages. They continue to be mafkia kedushin, uprooting marriages by saying you don't need to get a divorce because the marriage is conditional. They continue writing gittin. And the Rabbinical Assembly has said that they're not going to discipline them. Lieberman said they won't discipline them because they don't like inquisitions. Well, then what's the point of the Orthodox going out on a limb, and what benefit does it bring? Because at the end of the day, if you're not going to be able to bring the entire conservative rabbinate into this and expel those who don't go along with it, then it doesn't serve a purpose. And therefore, it didn't go anywhere. There's two other people, great rabbis, I want to speak about in their relationships to Lieberman. The first being Rav Shlomo Goren, who publicly shows his esteem for Lieberman. When we finish the classes, in a couple of classes, I'm going to read you from some of the letters that Rav Goren wrote. I'm going to go through some of the Hebrew letters there. He even writes to Rav Lieberman that during his, how happy he was to have Lieberman's support during the controversies he was going through. We'll see about it. The fact that, and this is funny, because the Haredim didn't need reasons to attack Rav Goren. I'll go into more detail Rav Goren when I talk about his letter. But the fact that, and Rav Goren had no problem, he attacked the Reform movement, but when he dealt with the conservative movement, he distinguished between those who acknowledge God and halacha and those who don't. And he referred to Lieberman, quote, as one of the most learned sages and scholars that Judaism has. So the fact that Rav Goren in the 70s is saying that not all conservative rabbis are michutz l'machane, which is exactly what the Rav and even Moshe said from a halachic standpoint, at least after the fact. And the fact that he's speaking positively about Lieberman, now for Rav Goren to do that, that's nothing special. I just showed you there's lots of Gedolim who spoke that way. But this brought about the wrath of the Aguda magazine, the Jewish Observer. And the Jewish Observer, in one of their many attacks on Rav Goren, said as follows, quote, any individual, no matter how, quote, learned a scholar, end quote, he may be, who associates himself with such an anti-Torah movement cannot rightfully be exempt from Rav Goren's condemnation as a member of those who do not acknowledge God's ways. In other words, Rav Goren condemned the Reform as those who don't acknowledge God's ways. So the Jewish Observer says that Lieberman also has to be that. And the fact that Rav Goren is respecting Lieberman, they say perhaps Rav Goren is blinded by the, quote, scholarship of one Jewish theological seminarian. I don't know what to make of the Jewish Observer putting scholarship in quotes. Like the implication is that it's not real scholarship. It's like pseudo scholarship. Well, I mean, I don't know who wrote that article in the Jewish Observer. I don't assume they have any knowledge of scholarship to begin with, but it would have been bad enough if they said perhaps he's blinded by the scholarship of Lieberman. That's what others said. But to put scholarship in quotes, that means you're saying it's not real scholarship. Unbelievable. But let me mention the Lubavitcher Rebbe now. And I'm going to play a couple of videos for you. The Lubavitcher Rebbe had a positive view of Lieberman, or so it seems. See, the Rebbe was special. The Rebbe judged everyone, ba'asher husham, whatever their circumstance was. He always looked for the positive. That doesn't mean that the Rebbe would have told Lieberman to go to the seminary, but once Lieberman's there, then all the Rebbe sees is the good and the positive he could bring out. The Rebbe did this with everyone. He did it with Reform rabbis. Herbert Wiener, the Reform rabbi. He wrote, he was very close to the Rebbe. He wrote the Wild Goats of Ein Gedi, 9.5 Mystics. You can read 9.5 Mystics, the whole chapter there about him and the Rebbe. Chapter of him where it's see who to cook, great stuff, Herbert Wiener, Reform rabbi. But the Rebbe thought that he had a role. He shouldn't be Reformed, but as long as he is Reformed, he has a role to play. So let me just give you some examples of how the Rebbe acts differently than so many other Gedolim. Chaim Zalman Dimitrovsky. We've mentioned the name Chaim Zalman Dimitrovsky. Here's a picture of him from Boyarin's article. I mentioned Boyarin again. That's an artist thing. He used to come up, Dimitrovsky would come up to Harvard when we had conferences with Professor Twersky. He'd be one of the scholars who sometimes would come up. He's an expert in the Rashba. He published a few volumes of the Tshuvas HaRashba, Mosader of Cook. He's a Jerusalem Talmud Chacham from a rabbinic family. One of those people that when Lieberman went in the summer back to Jerusalem, he wants to find Iluyim, so he finds Dimitrovsky and he brings him back to America. Dimitrovsky told the story in this book about connections to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He said that he comes to America and then he sees that the seminary is connected to the conservative movement. He thought it was just an institution of scholarship. So he doesn't know if he could fulfill his contract. He wrote a contract, but now he sees he's training conservative rabbis. What is he supposed to do? So Dov Zlotnick, I'll play you some of Dov Zlotnick in a few minutes. He says, come to the Rebbe, because Dov Zlotnick also comes out of Torah V'das and Torah observant completely, but he's been teaching at the seminary and he's very close to the Rebbe. Wait till you see some of the videos I'm going to show you. He says, come to the Rebbe. So he goes to the Rebbe. And what the Rebbe tells Dimitrovsky is, as long as Lieberman is in the seminary, you can stay there. If you resign, it won't make a good impression. But if Lieberman leaves, then you have to leave as well. Now, I want to show you a couple of videos here of Dov Zlotnick. And listen carefully and watch what the Rebbe says. And then I'll comment on some of the things that I think are significant in what the Rebbe says. And then I'm going to show you a video of him with Bernard Mandelbaum. I'll talk about Bernard Mandelbaum in a few minutes, but first let me show you Zlotnick. Zlotnick was very close to the Rebbe. You can go on, and the Chabad don't hide this. You can go on, for example, you can go on one of the websites and you can read the whole story about how Zlotnick was talking about Taras Mishpacha at the seminary, and the Rebbe encouraged him, and the Rebbe, was telling him that he has to publish it. But I have to get the sound. So let me go back a second. When I share this, I'll share sound. I want to play you two things from Zlotnick. But even before Zlotnick, you can hear Zlotnick's wife, and you can watch this video. It's in English, Hebrew subtitles. In the interest of time, I'm not going to play this as well. But it's interesting in and of itself because it's the Rebbe encouraged Dov Zlotnick, the Rebbe told Dov Zlotnick that Zlotnick's wife, who was not a Torah scholar, she's an artist, but that she should give shiurim. And so Dov Zlotnick taught her Mishnah, and then she taught to the women, and for like 25 years, she gave a shiur in Mishnah to women in Riverdale, which was moved into the Riverdale Jewish Center. So that's of interest also because of the women's angle. Well, the story she tells is that Dov Zlotnick was telling the Rebbe about the shiur he gives every week, the people have to repair, and then the Rebbe asks them, what do the women do during the shiur? And Zlotnick says, well, they're preparing shalosh shudas for us. And the Rebbe says, that's not enough. They're women. They're not there just to prepare shalosh shudas. They also need to learn. So Dov Zlotnick's wife began teaching. But there's two videos online of Dov Zlotnick. I'll play you both of them now, and then comment on them. Here you go.
Your session in Marc Lieberman, Heinz. The ninth technisch. Dann akute Schloss Verreich, was den Pariu haben schon. Sagen nach Rumeli. Yeah. Hatran Shirley, das ist Kirschen down, und now the nomming again of Rabshol. Yes. Mit Chadamonim, ich bin ein Talmud, ich bin mit Chadamonim jeden Tag in Klasse. Das ist hier der Montenplatz, das ist Schneider Talmud. Yes. Wenn sie Chazer und Lieber, wir standen mit den Jahren, aber die Jahren schon tegen. Skolle der Rat. Und was du rufst, als mit Obdruck in seiner Sache, was es soll nicht sein, Lachas kam, das ist ein in Teleskirchen, also der ist, wird haben lernen, was ich sehen, dass es für seine in jungen welcher gelebt. Dann ist es heilig nicht in Seminar, sondern in Teleskirchen. Das war ein guter Besuch.
Teleskirchen ist es ja für Finkelstein.
Aber hat gemacht das zu Horus, aber mit Kind hat das gemacht. Was soll sein, der hat was den ganzen sein, ich bin nicht zufrieden. Aber bitte Leben soll sein zufrieden. Das war ein guter Besuch.
So the first thing we see is the Rebbe, he wants stuff from Lieberman to be published so that people know that his real life is Torah learning and Torah scholarship, not the seminary. That although we saw that for Lieberman thought the seminary was a focus of central point of his life because that's where he's spreading Torah. But of course, the Rebbe's not into the seminary, so he wants to remove Lieberman from the seminary basically, and let the people know about this. Now the Rebbe was confused. The Rebbe said Torah's Kohanim, that it is Finkelstein. Finkelstein wrote 4 volumes commentary on the Sifra. And the Rebbe was thinking of that Lieberman wrote it on the Sifra, but it's not. But okay, that doesn't really matter. We'll see what the Rebbe says about Finkelstein in a minute. But you see there his how he relates to Lieberman. Now I'm going to show you another video. This is what I just showed you is 91. Look at the next one. I'm going to show you. Actually, no, I want to go back for a second. There's one thing he says. One more thing in this video, as I recall. Okay, no, he doesn't say another thing. So I want to then show you another video of hold on. Okay, here's the other one with Zlotnick.
Finkelstein, von der Schliach, eine Form und jetzt heute kommen auf das Sifra.
Alle 4
Chalotten. Wenn ich alle 4 Chalotten da.
Das ist welches Chol zu Chol. You continue to write about Taras HaMishpocha. Yes, till now, and had even more success until now. Ich weiß nicht, ich bedanke, dass Sie gekommen sind, dass Sie begannen, was sagen Dr. Finkelstein, der Rabbi Finkelstein, haben wir ein größer Wunder, hat sich seine Familien, in den Theological Seminary. Sie tun noch nachhören, und hat schon einen Garten mehr.
Warum sagen das?
Ihr könnt es sagen, wie viel, aber ihr stellt es nicht.
Er hat nicht kein Idee doch. Er hat
keine Schuss mit, er ist so, ich bin kurz nicht. Ich sage mal, und was ist das Berlin, er hat gesagt, da war er nicht, da war schon nicht. Ich wusste, Berlin, man spielt da 100%. 99 kommen nicht wissen. Nächstes Mal spielt er alle 100. Ich stelle einmal, das wird noch nicht brägig, aber sie gedeihen, hat er sich auf Familien, darf er schon in dem alles, was er kennt, und Pikuach nicht, das ist sicher willkommen.
Gut.
Das soll kein Scheiß sein, ich bin dankbar für ihn, und ich habe dafür bekommen, als ich die Theological Seminary, so haben wir sie mit Familien in einer Jahre, also man kann nicht verstehen, was er schreibt in seinem Segel.
Gut, das ist
Das ist ein Namenstand, ja. Das ist verrennt und ein guter Besuch. Ich habe noch verraten. Das ist a special success in your writing. You wrote me about your daughter, she's not here. Then you'll give it for her, and that's your daughter. Much chilik mach.
Now,
Ich sage mal, und was ist das Berlin, der hat so schon einen Garten.
Warum sagen das?
Okay. There was one thing else I need to show you. I don't know where it is. I'll have to find it for next class. But just about this passage, Lieberman at this time is he died shortly after this. This is 1991. He's 96 years old. The Rebbe says, "What's going on at the seminary? It's collapsing. Terrible stuff happening. Why doesn't Finkelstein say anything?" So Zlotnick says, "What can he say? He can't say anything. He's gone. He's not the chancellor of it anymore, and it's not his show anymore." But you see how the Rebbe was. He accepted that's the sifra he's given, but he's surprised. He's like, "What's Finkelstein doing? We need him now." I was trying to get the date of his year, so I didn't. Born in 1895, dies November 1991, so I didn't see. But I don't think there he says it. He says it elsewhere. Is another. Did he say? Did I miss it when I was looking away? Where he says that Finkelstein is. I ask about him, and my friends wonder. I'm going to find that. There's another video, or maybe it's also, which I thought it was one of these two, where I'll show you next class, where the Rebbe says, "Give my best, my regards to Finkelstein," and he says, "Some of my friends are upset with me that I want to give my regards." In other words, the Rebbe understood that some people in Orthodoxy were not so happy with, I'm going to make a note of this, I'll find it for next class, with his relationship. What I want to do next class, I see it's already time, I'm going to play you one more video, the Rebbe with Rabbi Bernard Mandelbaum, who was at the seminary forever, hold many positions. Oh no, you know what, let me do it. We have 2 more minutes, exactly, that's where it is. The last video I'll show you, and this is, hold on, I want to get back to, here, Bernard Mandelbaum. You can read about him, it's not showing up on the screen here, hold on, let me do it again. Now it'll share. You can read all about Rabbi Bernard Mandelbaum, his whole life at the seminary, smicha there. He look at all the places, things he worked at the seminary. He was, where does it say? It says here, he was a professor of homiletics, instructor of Midrash. He edited the Psikter of Kahana, which you find in Ocher Chachma. He was registered, dean of students, director of the seminary's Department of Religious Psychiatry. Eventually, it says, he became provost, and in anticipation of the retirement of Finkelstein as chancellor, he was elected president. And then you can read in this article, which comes from Encyclopedia Judaica, that the question was, who was going to take over? 2 factions among the leadership arose. One which supported Mandelbaum, both because of his intellectual credentials, but also he was committed to preserving the traditional roots of conservative Judaism. The stronger faction aspired to bring to the seminary a worthy leader who would be more amenable to the changes they saw, such as the ordination of women, through a more liberal interpretation of the halakha. We'll deal with the ordination of women issue, but, and it says when Gerson D. Cohen was selected over Mandelbaum, the stage was set for an accelerated ideological shift to conservatism. So we've mentioned before, we'll get back to it. And so when Cohen takes over, so when the Rebbe says to Zlotnick, "Why isn't Finkelstein speaking out about what's happening in the seminary?" That's what Zlotnick's saying, that Finkelstein has no say anymore, not to mention the fact he was quite old. But I want to play you one more video, and then we'll end with this. And this is Rabbi Bernard Mandelbaum. You can't imagine these conservative people from the conservative institution, and Mandelbaum is a conservative Jew, he's not Zlotnick, being received with such friendship, let's say other Gedolei Yisrael. So here I have it. It's let's see, I had to put it, let me see. Let's pull up especially here. Now I should be able to share it. Let's see. Okay, here you go. There's another one, by the way, which I'm not going to share with you, where Zlotnick talks about how Lieberman went slichos at 770. I thought that was very interesting. You know what? I'm going to have to, we've had this problem before. I'm going to have to call it up for you again, because if I haven't touched it in a while, and then we'll end with this. So hold on. Okay, now I got it, and I can pull it up. Pull it up for you. Let me share it and watch Rabbi Mandelbaum together with the Rebbe. Why isn't it going? Oh.
Weil die Zeit das nicht gesehen.
Ist er weg. Und der Sefer kommt raus. Promenaden.
Dann?
Eine Promenaden. Mit so ein paar Drecker.
Du warten noch 10 Mal?
No.
Was denn?
Was in der Morgen gesagt, als ich im Wolf verhandelt sagte, kennt nicht dazu. Und jetzt auf der Seminary's Places, ich habe eine Pension, kann ich nachhaben.
Gut, was durchwerden in my skills.
Ich reden door bij Groningen.
Ja.
Ik ga voor Tochten.
Werden Sie abholen, das sagt man nicht.
Sagt
Das war ein guter Zug. Wann die gesund zu hören, das war der ganze Sprache.
Schönen Dank.
Ich habe bei Kunden seit Nachten dabei, der unser Beit damals Freund.
Ja.
Nicht sagen, wer das ist.
Huh? Zlotnick, right,
Yeah.
right. Ik wil een paar nacht zijn.
Ja,
Ik heb je van hier in zijn bad.
Das war der Wein.
Right.
Ich sage es an das Konni. Ich sage es an das Konni.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
right.
Das ist ein guter Zug. Das war gerade.
Like Mandelbaum.
Ja.
Ich tue das schon mal für Rabbi Finkelstein.
Je zei hem jeder scheiders.
Ja.
Ja. Gezind in der Moech, Chlor, schreibt der Sefer.
Schreibt das
De Hagdomet zu de Sifri. Zu de Sifra. Je hebt ook de tweede en de dritte galak. En de eerste Hagdoma schrijft er wegen Kol Sifru Tanaim. Schreibt er grootste Sefer.
Wir wollen einen guten Leben haben, aber das ist so.
Zijn zeer zufrieden als ik bevrijd van je.
Ja, die Fratschen niet de meisten morgen.
Ja,
Sie sagen, meine, ich zufrieden sein, nicht zufrieden.
Geht mir Vater Rabbi
Bei
Finkelstein.
dem Absorte, das war der ganze Gespräch.
Okay.
Ein guter Besuch.
So that's what I meant. You see, he says, he asked Rabbi Lieberman, to the extent that my friend, I have asked so many times that my friends are upset with me for asking about him. But the Rebbe's the Rebbe's. What can you say? They don't make them like that anymore. So let's conclude now. What we're going to do next class, before I get to questions, I'll briefly talk about a dispute that mirrored the Lieberman dispute, namely with Rabbi Faur, briefly, and then we're going to I want to speak about return in the last couple of classes about some of Lieberman's scholarship. What can we say about Tosefta Kifshuta, Hilchos Yerushalmi, Hellenism and Jewish Palestine, as well as respond to Rabbi David Golinkin, how to categorize Lieberman, and a few random things we'll pull together that I couldn't put in the general story that I've been telling. So let me get to the questions now, the comments. Someone asked, how old are these extreme Ger practices? They don't go back to Europe. No, they're interested in Eretz Yisrael. They began with the Rebbe took over in like 1948. That's when they began. And then they became more and more extreme over time. David says, I always thought it's interesting that while we often quote the need to provide proper attribution when citing a source, the author of this statement itself is unclear, as at least 3 separate Tanaim are quoted throughout Shas as being the author of the statement. There probably is something profound or subversive with that fact. I always assume that, names, you find often that names get exchanged. And but the fact is they're trying to cite it, even though they're not sure. That's how you often find passages cited in the names of different rabbis. They're the same passage in different rabbis. Wasn't Chaim Zimmerman at Tel's Yeshiva at some point? No, never heard of that. Maybe someone can point out differently. I've never heard of him being at Tel's. He was in Chicago, and then when that was ended, he went off. He was out. He comes from Yeshiva Sherbitz Al-Chonim. He's from Rabbinic family as well, and then he has a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. Wouldn't Rabbi Lieberman be? Moshe says, wouldn't Rabbi Lieberman be considered a posek? Curious why we don't have responses from Lieberman. The one psak we have of his. Well, wait till next week. I give you his psak about Thanksgiving. He has a psak about Thanksgiving, but his one psak really is the one on women rabbis. the psak that none other, as we'll see, the Rav Hershel Schachter, the one source Rav Hershel Schachter cites against women rabbis really is Saul Lieberman. But no, he was not a posek. He never was a posek. He was a Talmud Chacham, just like a Rosh Yeshiva. Typical Rosh Yeshiva is not a posek. He never, I don't know who he asked if he had shilas, but he was not a posek. At the seminary, he was the halachic authority there. So if people asked him questions, but he was not a posek writing responsa. At the seminary, the halachist was Boaz Cohen. iPad says the New York Times cared then and would consider it newsworthy about Rebelkin. And no, he doesn't say that was a letter that he wrote in the YU Commentator. What Hillel Goldberg says is he said that they feared that the New York Times would be informed. What he's saying is that they feared that the news would get out. I don't know if he literally means New York Times. Bill says, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein took the class in 1967 to the Grosh Lieberman and told the students they could ask about anything. So thank you, Bill, for confirming this. By the way, in Mosaic, an article appeared today talking about academic, like Torah scholarship, not in the Lieberman world, let's say, or the Jewish studies world, but people who are doing it in addition to their other stuff. He spoke about the Sfarim Chatter podcast and Hakira, and our own Bill Gewirtz gets a mention because his main job is something else, but in his side work, he's probably America's greatest expert on Zmanim and has written much scholarship on it, with much scholarship to come out, Od Chazon L'Moed. So he's in that article as one of the people really important writers on areas that are doing it really not as, although maybe now he can devote more time. He'll have to tell us, but Shkoyach.
Retired.
Shkoyach, so now you can do it. David says, I have no knowledge of Lichtenstein taking students to the yeshiva, which Bill just confirmed it, but the Beit Midrash of Har Etzion has copies of Tosefta Kipshuta. Yes, not only that, a friend of mine who weren't there, David Zinberg, told me that it's in the Makoros of Rav Aaron. When he'd have shir, he'd give as Makoros. And Moshe testifies a dut ne'emana that the Beit Midrash at YU has copy of Tosefta Kipshuta as well. Well, of course, I mean, it's a kosher book, and in YU and Har Etzion, his career choices are not enough to passel him. And as I said, it's on Otzar HaChachma. As we've spoken in previous cases, Otzar HaChachma now is the gatekeeper, deciding what's kosher and what's not. So Levi Ginsburg, not in. Saul Lieberman, in on Otzar HaChachma. And Bernard Mandelbaum in as well, because his work on Pesikta. Who would have funded this based in? The salaries, helpers, offices. You could say the same thing, who funds the RCA based in? The OU raises money with kashrus. They can raise money. I'm not sure how they would fund it. I don't even know how the RCA funds it. Maybe through the OU, but I don't know. As far as I know, they didn't deal with that. You can get the shuls. I guess you can have the shuls contribute every year. Every RCA OU shul would contribute a certain amount. There's all sorts of ways you can fund it. Did he look for the positive in Rav Shach? The Rebbe did. He did look for the positive in Rav Shach, 100%. And he didn't respond to the attacks. And the only time he responded was that one video I played you. I believe the Rebbe looked for the positive. Maybe not always, not that one video where he's speaking, but in general he did. And look, it's a different example. Baruch. Here you're talking about Rav Shach, who's attacking the Rebbe and attacking Chabad. That's different than talking about, let's say, a Reform rabbi or a conservative rabbi. They're just living their lives. So it's understandable that's different. Bill says that one of the vastly expanded essays recently published in English by Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik was what he was referring to by saying that the original article quoted limited sources. Oh, thank you. Because the real audience was the Rav, Lieberman, and Katz, who don't need sources. B says, did the Rebbe ask for copies of Lieberman's work for Lubavitcher Rebbe for Hasidim to learn? No. And I don't think the Rebbe ever asked for works. People gave him those works, and it goes to the Rebbe's library, which means that it's for Yechidei Skula. I don't think the Rebbe wants the average person studying scholarship, academic, just like the Rebbe doesn't want the average person studying all the other things the Rebbe studied. But for exceptional people, that's different. Rabbi Shudnow says they brought some of Dr. Finkelstein's books to him for sign. He gladly signed, but the Sifra he did not, saying he's not Moshe Rabbeinu. Also, Zlotnick was your teacher. Next class, I think, or the class after. I think we only have like three, 4 more classes. I'll tell you the story with Zlotnick, I promised. Thank you, Jennifer. Baruch says, I know Baruch, you and the Rebbe, it's an issue here, but funny how the Lubavitcher Rebbe was so friendly with the conservatives. If Rabbi Hollander would have known that, maybe he would not have been so friendly with Lubavitch. Rabbi Hollander, and I interviewed him. I'm not gonna say I knew him, but I interviewed him and I know all about him, and I went through his archives. His archives are given to YU. And I went through them very carefully. What you could say about Rabbi Hollander is, despite he always respected the Yisrael, he did not believe in a lot of things the Rav believed in, but he never would contradict the Rav publicly, and he always respected the Rav. So if the Lubavitcher Rebbe is going to be friendly, then Rabbi Hollander, maybe it's a teiku, a question, but he never would have come out against it. And someone says, so with the conservative movement, if helpful, it's on the basis, sure. The conservative movement also, if it's a beit, then that's the conservative are agreed with, and the RA is going to give money as well. I don't see how it ever could have worked. This idea in the 50s, you're telling conservative rabbis after they already had a beit din that you're going to give up your halachic authority, and they didn't even want to accept the Lieberman ketubah, as we saw, because they thought that that was too orthodox. It was a non-starter from the get-go. The fact that and now I guess it appears a non-starter, but the fact that at the time, some people thought it actually might be possible. And David Hollander gets Rav Aaron Kotler to agree that reluctantly, he says that if you can make it work, because after all, it's yichus, if you can solve the yichus problem. And the last comment, Rabbi should know, I remember the tents in the seminary courtyard for drying the books and manuscripts from the tower. You can find, I think it's online, but I believe in the Encyclopedia Judaica, in the article on the seminary or someone else, there's a picture of in that courtyard. I haven't been there in a long time now. The courtyard in the seminary, all the books were laid out to dry. I don't know how many had to throw out, what they had to do. So thank you all for coming out again. Rabbi Kelman, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. We look forward to next week and the few upcoming weeks. Okay, as we get closer to the end. Resh, you want to say something about Uncle Wolf?
Yeah. Dr. Shapiro mentioned Rabbi Hayyim Zimmerman. Before he was in Chicago, he lived in Berkeley, lived in Borough Park. 1956, I did some work for him. He was a brilliant guy, a little bit out of the ordinary, but he's a brilliant guy. He had a brilliant memory. He wrote, I don't know what book, I was typing some manuscripts.
Oh, no, he wrote a number. He wrote a very long one on the date line, and he wrote other stuff. He was, as I said, one of a kind. He used to drive a convertible. He used to watch soccer games with the guys. He was, I think he's a Baruch Ber Leibowitz's nephew, as I recall.
I don't know. He played the market, and he couldn't see on one eye. And when he offered me a ride home from when I worked at his house, I would rather walk.
The Frimmer brothers were Talmidim, as I recall. You can ask, I have the story, I've told it before, you can listen to the Berkovitz talks. It's very easy, just go to Turn Motion website, you sign in, and you can pull up and just search Eliezer Berkovitz, the story of how Reb Zimmerman was fired when he gets up and he declares he wants to thank his good friend, the Apikoros Eliezer Berkovitz, and Berkovitz gets up with, I think it was a Coke bottle, and slams it on the ground. It's just terrible. And the next day they fired Rabbi Zimmerman for his disrespect to Rabbi Berkovitz. But he was something.
Yeah. I forgot about him. This was in 1956, a long time ago.
No, he's a Gon Shabagonim.
Yeah.
Like a lot of geniuses, they're not typical people. What can I say? That's the fate of many geniuses. Yes, but we won't say the.
He was a doctor. He got a PhD. He calls himself Dr. Hayyim Zimmerman. He published books in English, Torah in Existence, and others. He takes on Kant. I mean, he's a real genius.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. Look forward to next week. Like I say, as I mentioned, Rachel Sharansky-Danziger will not be giving her class tomorrow at 11 a.m. So our next year is 1 p.m. tomorrow. We're starting Rabbi Dr. Aaron Adler on Rav Soloveitchik on Hanukkah. Hanukkah is in less than 2 weeks. So we'll everybody join us at 1 o'clock, and then we'll have all the rest of our shiurim, please God, for the week. And we look forward to learning with you, and have a Laila Tov, and be well, everybody. Thank you very much.
Toda Rabba.
B'vakasha.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.